Thank you for those fascinating insights during this very interesting time. And I'm looking forward to your polling in the next 6 months to a year, because I have a feeling public perceptions are going to change enormously. I wonder if Hassan Nasrallah in a year's time will be as popular as he is today. Probably it'll be the Wal Ghanims of Egypt, Bahrain, and Yemen who will be the leaders. We're going to, or the heroes rather, we're maybe the leaders as well. But we're going to open the floor to questions. I am going to begin. I want to talk a little bit about the discrepancy or the contradiction in opinion between Islam and democracy that was very clear from your polling, Stephen. You talked about the need to bridge or find the bridging mechanisms between religion and democracy. And this is a question for both of you. And I'm wondering, clearly that's going to be an issue as we work toward democracy in Egypt, how to find the synthesis between religion, Sharia, and democracy. And I'm wondering if you could unpack what you think might emerge as an Egyptian democracy, one that is both faithful to some elements of Sharia as well as faithful to democratic principles.
Well, I wouldn't claim to be an expert on that topic, but just looking at what we have seen in the polls and things that people have said in focus groups, I would predict that you are going to see something that's not unlike what you saw in Iraq, where there really the kinds of things that people were saying in Iraq were somewhat similar to the kinds of things people are saying in Egypt, and which is that they want there to be a certain Islamic identity to the country, to the government, that it is seen that it claims to be an Islamic state, that it is the official religion. So there will be a number of, in a sense, symbolic gestures of definition. Even when we presented the argument, this would be unfair to people who are not Islamic, that didn't cut it. Majorities rejected that argument. I think that probably Islamic scholars will play some role in looking at legislation. Are they going to have the real power to veto legislation? That's sort of up for a discussion, but there's going to be some kind of consultation in the process, and some of it may just be kind of symbolic, some kind of deliberative process. But so these kinds of things, I think, will probably play some role, and I think it's important for the U.S. to not look at that and go, "Eek," there are some of these were incorporated into the Iraqi constitution as well. It's and that has sort of worked itself out and is not really foreground, though it was in the early stages of the formation of their constitution.
Well, let me just make 3 points on this. First, I don't think it's up to the U.S. To decide what the outcome will be in Egypt. I don't only mean that as it's up to the Egyptian on moral ground, but I mean that in the sense that if you look at the American record of trying to shape or engineer an outcome to our liking, it hasn't been good, in any of the countries. And I think that we're far better off to allow things to play themselves out and then design our policy accordingly. There are obviously a very important American interest at stake. And those American interests have to be looked at in the context of the change in the region. We're going to have to recalibrate. In the short term, whatever happens in Egypt, whoever emerges on top, whatever party wins in the end, it's going to have to coexist with two dynamics that are very powerful. One is the military. The military will remain very important in Egypt. Of course, unless they shoot themselves in the foot in the coming weeks, but so far they've handled themselves relatively carefully. And Egyptians expect them to play an important role in the state, not necessarily in the internal dynamics, but the external dynamics. They will probably be the anchor of the national security policy. And their interest remains sort of tied to the U.S. and committed to regional agreements, including the agreement with Israel. And so in some ways, the parameters of America's interest in the foreign policy arena, if we don't have any blowback by intervening in a manner that is undesirable, will be relatively protected. I think we have to be careful here not to play a heavy-handed role in that. But the third point I want to make is I'm not sure I agree about the Iraq analogy. And the reason for it is Egypt is far more homogeneous. If you look at Iraq, it's going to take us really another couple of decades as scholars to analyze what happened in Iraq. It's not just the Sunni-Shia divide and the Arab-Kurdish divide, which were complicated, and therefore kind of led to a particular type of mobilization once there was anarchy in the state. The anarchy itself had been taking place over a period of 2 decades, I would say, because even before Iraq disintegrated, before Saddam Hussein fell, for a whole decade under the sanctions, there was a disintegration of the Iraqi middle class. There was a rise of tribalism. And in fact, if you have to tell, I'm not sure that the Sunni-Shia divide is going to be sufficient in and of itself to tell you how people ultimately organized. I think the tribalism explanation is probably more accurate. Of course, by definition, when you're talking about tribal, you enter into the religious factionalism. So in Egypt, we don't have that kind of. We have obviously a minority of Copts. We have mostly Sunni population. We don't have a disintegration of the state. We've had political parties that are going to play themselves out. So I'm not sure how it's going to play itself out. I wouldn't take the data that we had in the past a few years as a guide for what's likely to happen. When you have revolutions, a lot of changes happen. People completely have different priorities. Identifying with Islam when Islam is the only vehicle for mass political mobilization, and people don't have an option, and they saying it, it's often an answer, I don't like the regime, I'd rather have them. In an environment, an open environment where you have other alternatives, we don't know how this is going to play itself out. Egyptians are religious people, as are many people in the Arab world. The religiosity and the way they relate to it is not connected directly to politics. And when there is a politics that is not directly deriving its legitimacy from religion, there are many things that could happen. So I wouldn't predict an outcome on the basis of what I would not predict that Islamists would win. They could. I don't know. But I would not use the past as a guide to what is likely to be the political priority of most Egyptians in a changing revolutionary environment.